Hello, DGL community. Thank you so much for joining me for session two of our November series. So, what does it look like to push through when my faith is almost at give-upish? We are examining faith siblings who were in those dark spots of the journey. This week's session focuses on Elijah and the widow's oil. We know that at the end, the jar is filled with all oil and it overflows and overflows, but there is a point in her journey where her commentary after the facts that her husband is dead and the creditors are coming for her two sons, her commentary says, but you know they serve the Lord. And many of us may be able to identify with that space of feeling as if I'm trying to serve the one true living God, but things are not working out as I expected. What does it look like to push through when my faith is almost at give upish? Stay with me. Thank you so much for again for joining me for the So What Does It Look Like Bible study, where we explore this ancient old book to see tips, tangible tools for applying its very valid lessons to our lives today. Today we are looking at Second Kings chapter 4 at Elisha and the widow's oil. I'm going to give this quick disclaimer to the end of the story before delving into the Bible study more deeply. As articulated in the introduction, we understand that at the end, in about verse number 6 and 7, it says, "Now it came to pass when the vessels were full that she said to her son, 'Bring me another vessel.' And he said to her, 'There is not another vessel.' So the oil ceased. Then she came and she told the man of God, who's Elisha, and he said, 'Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest.'" So this woman, this widow, who was at a point of famine and desolation, ends up having more than enough. But what's the journey in between that space? That somewhere just kind of between desolate and then hitting your point of destiny. What's that space? How do we push through? We're going to examine the lesson for that. As I've mentioned in our session one, normally in the Bible studies, if you're followed at all, and go ahead and subscribe, and yes, please share if the messages bless you. Most often, I attempt to give several tips so that we have something to chew on throughout the week to meditate on, reflect. But at this point of the year, and in this particular series where we're examining, so what does it look like for my faith to almost be at give upish? I'm just going to try to give us one very relevant, tangible tip. Like, that's enough, right? If I can just do that one thing, if I can get enough strength and energy to do that one thing. So, in the Bible studies throughout this series, I'll give you just one tangible tip. And if you'll focus on it, meditate on it, and just allow it to sink in and do your absolute best to push through, to apply it, and watch our God, our faithful daddy God, do something in our lives. So, again, then, we're going to go ahead and jump into Second Kings chapter 4, verse number 1. And that reads, "A certain woman of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, 'Your servant, my husband is dead. And you know that your servant, he feared the Lord. And the creditor is coming to take my two sons to be his slaves.'" So the facts here are her husband is dead. And number two, the creditors are coming to take her two sons. But she adds this commentary there, and she says, "And you know that your servant feared the Lord." You know that. And if we were to put ourselves in her shoes, it's a way of articulating that I am trying to serve the Lord. I am trying to do what's right. I'm trying to trust in God, to pray, to fast, to go to church, to treat people like I want to be treated. All of those things, I am attempting to live by the principles of God. But things don't seem to be working out for me. And that is real talk. I often feel that we owe each other the honor, we owe each other the respect of telling one another the truth about this Christian journey. There are parts and times in the Christian journey, in the process of becoming like Christ, that things don't always work out the way that we expected. And sometimes we find ourselves kind of asking God, like, like, what is the point? If things are going to work out like this in my life and I'm serving you, then what is the point of serving you? So this widow is articulating to Elisha, like, you know, he feared the Lord, but he's dead, and now they're coming to take my two sons. That's her plight. And I would definitely say that she probably then qualifies for being in a place where her faith is almost at give upish. But here's what happened in verse number 2. So Elisha said to her, "What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" And she said, Your maidservant has nothing in the house but a jar of oil. Then he said in verse number 3, go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all of your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not gather just a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, then pour into all of those vessels and set aside the full ones. So we can see the process there. Elijah is giving her instructions. These instructions include going to her neighbors and asking for stuff. And if she is anything like many of us, that's the thing that we do not want to do. We do not want to have to ask for anything for the most part. We like to be independent, self sufficient, and that's for a variety of reasons. Some of us have just been raised to be self sufficient, to not be a burden on anybody else. Some of us have had bad experiences with asking. Some of us have experienced asking and receiving a no, or experienced asking and being talked about, are experiencing asking, and then you're forever, that it's forever being held over your head, and you're being reminded of the opportunity of when you of the time when you needed to have a little bit of assistance. Some of us have just a bit of pride and we don't want to have to do that. So whatever the scenario is, some of us are sensitive to what other people are going through. We feel like, you know what, they need help themselves. And so asking, but he told her, you're going to have to go and ask your neighbors for the empty vessels. And then when you get those empty vessels, come into your house with your sons and shut the door. And then you're going to begin to pour into those vessels. So in verse number 5, it says, so she went from him and she shut the doors behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass when all of the vessels were full that she said to her sons, bring me another vessel. And he said to her, but there is not another vessel. So the oil it ceased. Then she came and she told the man of God, and he said, go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. And that's the end of the story, right? So, what do we do? What do we do? How do we push? What does it look like to continue to push forward when our faith is almost at give up? I have this very simple, tangible tip for us that we can glean right from this passage. It will be right here in verse number 3. Then he said, go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all of your neighbors, ask for empty vessels, and don't gather just a few. And do not gather just a few, right? So, the tangible tip that I'll share today is simply ask. Is simply ask. Now, hang with me for just a moment and hear how I'm going to apply that. It's ask. It's ask. And he said, and don't ask for just a few. Don't gather just a few. So we have to envision then this widow woman. This widow woman, then, just being a widow alone means that she's already gone through great loss, heartache, right? She's in possibly some remnants of grief. Her husband is dead, this widow woman. So her situation is not the best from the start. Then it additionally asks if the creditors are coming, and they're coming to take her two sons. So her husband and her sons are both associated with livelihood. They're both associated with covering and protection. They're both associated with resources. And basically, the scenario is being posited in such that she is about to lose contact with all of it. Not only has she had grief, but now as a mother, she's watching the creditors come for her two sons. And in that, with that being said, she lives in this neighborhood. And I always remind people that even though we're reading the Bible, these are regular folk just like you and I. So she lives in a community. We can be sure that there are a few people who know of her plight, who know of her circumstance, who already know that she's the poor widow whose husband died and the creditors are coming for her two sons. So they perhaps have had some discussions about her situation, but had some whispers about what she's going through. And perhaps we can even identify with that, with already going through a difficult moment, but you know that other people are aware of your difficult moment. There's no secrecy and there's no privacy about it. And you're just doing your all to perhaps try to maintain some sense of dignity, some sense of self sufficiency. And then Elisha gives her these instructions to now leave the confines, the isolation of her home with her two sons, and now you have to go out and go to these neighbors, go throughout this community asking. You have to ask for these empty vessels. And then on the flip side of that, she also knows the other side of that story for her neighbors, right? Perhaps they too have had their own set of struggles, or perhaps she's not the only one that the creditors are coming for, whatever that looks like. But she has to go amongst these people and ask them for empty vessels. She has to humble herself. She has to submit herself. She has to lay herself transparent, to lay herself vulnerable and ask for them. Perhaps some of them, when she asked, said no, and she had to go to the next people and ask anyway. Perhaps some of them said yes, but it was with pity in their eyes. It was some sense of, yeah, because I know you really need this. Perhaps in asking, she experienced some people who didn't have anything to give. Like she had to put herself out there over and over again because Elisha had instructed her, do not ask for just a few, but gather them from many places, from many people. So she had to eventually, I would suppose, get over the idea of asking and just ask, get over the hiccups and the hurdles to asking and just ask. She had to put herself in a position to receive by asking. That seems quite simple, but y'all, in our heart of hearts, we know that is not always the easiest thing to do. But I want to encourage each of us this week as we think about our visions, our goals, we think about the things that we want to accomplish before the year's end. Our truth probably very much is, if it was in ourselves, if we were sufficient in and of ourselves to be able to do all that needs to be done, we would have done it by now. It would not be November the 11th, and we're still trying to figure out how to do it. If we really had all of the time, all of the energy, all of the resources, all of the finances to be able to do the things that we have yet to do to accomplish the goals that we set out for 2019. And so, right here, when it feels very difficult to continue to believe, I'm encouraging myself and I'm encouraging those of you who are watching today to ask. What does that actually look like? Because I'm not saying go around to neighbors asking for empty jars. I am saying those empty jars represented in this scenario space and opportunity to receive more. And so for some of us, that ask will look like, in the midst of perhaps people being laid off or other people being dismissed or fired, you go ahead and ask for the raise. You ask for the promotion. You ask for the job that you desire. You ask for the opportunity. You ask for the mentor that you've been looking for. You apply. Applying is a way of asking. Apply for some things that you had said you perhaps were not qualified to receive. This is confirmation for you to go ahead and apply. Go ahead and articulate the desires of your heart in a relationship dynamic, whether it's platonic, romantic, whatever that is, being honest and true, being bold enough to acknowledge what you are in need of or what you desire to receive. It's like considering the different scenarios in our lives and really saying, I'm going to be transparent enough. I'm going to be humble enough. I'm going to be vulnerable enough to have those real conversations, to really put myself out there in various scenarios. I'm going to apply. I'm going to ask. I'm going to acknowledge. I'm going to express what needs to be expressed so that I can create opportunities as represented in this text by the empty vessels that came from so many places. Though each time that she put herself out there and asked for an empty vessel, she was creating opportunity, more space to have expansion, to have more room to pour this oil that would multiply for every empty vessel that she gathered. So, can we imagine if for every, but remember, she got those empty vessels each time that she asked for help. Can we imagine each of our asks being a opportunity for God to pour our oil in, to pour our blessing in, to pour our multiplication factor into our scenarios? If that is based on our ability to humble ourselves, to lend ourselves transparent and vulnerable, to create those spaces, how many of us are really willing to ask for help, to acknowledge that we need it, to apply in various situations and arenas where we want opportunity, I encourage us to use this week, like really perhaps today, just storming who and where can I ask, and what would that ask look like? A mentor of mine calls it our low hanging fruit. She often says in working on a project, don't try to jump way up high and figure out who you can connect with, like an Oprah or the president or the CEO on Wall Street. Start with the people who are your low hanging fruits. And I had opportunity in speaking with a young lady yesterday who would really like to enter into the speaking arena. I was able to give her that same advice when she said, I don't have any contacts. I don't know where to start. My encouragement was, well, you're right here at a church. Do you speak right here with the young ladies who are in your congregation? Have you gone to the youth director of the youth ministry to ask for an opportunity to share there long before you want to be on a huge platform? Have you found yourself asking for and being faithful in smaller platforms? So each of us, we can really consider, who can I ask? Who's my low hanging fruit? Who am I already connected to? What platforms do I already have access to that would allow me to do the things that I desire to do, the things that were a part of my goals, the things that were a part of my dreams? What positions do I need to ask, apply for? What resumes do I need to sit in? What resume do I need to update? That's a way of asking. In what relationship, conversation, dynamic do I need to acknowledge something that will create space for this relationship to work out differently, to work out more productively? Am I willing to ask? When our faith, it's almost at give upish. Oftentimes, it is because we have totally depended on our own faith. We've totally depended on our own strength, on our own energy. And many of us, it's November, rightfully so, we are exhausted. Now is even the time to tap into, to ask prayer partners to link in faith with you. It's time to link up with mentors and ask for their advice, ask for their experience, to allow your resource capacity to be beyond what you yourself have, because at this point those things may be exhausted, they may be tired, no judgment there, but it's just saying what we may need may be larger than what we have. And we, to push through, to see our faith to the end, we have to link up with other people who can link up either their resources, their connections, their prayer life, their finances, whatever that helping hand looks like. They may be willing to extend it to us, but we'll never know unless we ask. So that's it. That's my encouragement from 2 Kings chapter 4 with Elisha and the widow's oil. Just as one tangible tip, what does it look like to push through when my faith is almost at give upish? Well, for this lesson, that push through looks like asking. Be bold enough to ask, even if it's just for prayer. I honor the greatness in you. As always, I encourage you to continue to push through. And many of these lessons, I'm talking to myself and just sharing it with you. So God bless you. Please remember to subscribe and share. And I'll see you next week for another episode as we journey into the life of one more faith sibling. I'm excited about her. It's a her. To really examine, what does it look like to push through when my faith is almost at give upish. Have a fantastic remaining rest of the week. And remember, be bold enough to ask. I honor the greatness in you. Bye now.